Okay students, so this week's homework question is discuss the extent to which economic development, and remember economic development needs growth before development, in the BRICS economies, so using examples of Brazil, Russia, India or China, can be promoted solely by reliance on free market policies. So we've got two sides there. One of them is going to be the free market and one of them is going to be interventionist policies. Discuss question, so we're going to need an evaluative conclusion as well about which side we agree with, free market or government intervention. Okay, so extract A in the case study gives you an overview of the BRIC economies. It is telling you what they have in common. It says the BRIC refers to a group of 4 large developing countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, distinguishing them from other emerging markets by their potential to rank among the world's largest and most influential economies by the 21st century. So maybe not in terms of standard of living per capita, but largest in terms of total GDP, due to their natural resources. So we have primary dependency here, size and structure of their population, so they're going to have a significantly large population, attitudes to investment, they're all encouraging FDI, and trade, they're all focused on trying to export to gain economic development, and their capacity for technological progress, so they are attempting to move their economies towards more advanced technology. The 4 BRIC economies have a combined population of over 2.8 billion, about 40% of the world's population, so that'll be a significant market in the future. They also produce more than a quarter of the world's output. So in terms of output of goods, they are significant. Analysts have suggested that to enable the country to realise its potential for growth, there is a number of conditions that need to be met. So now we have examples of what is needed for development. We've got human capital, so HDI, in terms of education and life expectancy, but it also mentions inequality, stable macroeconomic environment, so economic stability through inflation, growth and borrowing, access to current technologies such as the internet and mobile communications, so supply side, and a stable political environment including the rule of law and absence of corruption. Extract B looks at Brazil in a bit more detail, again referring to its natural resources or primary dependency. It mentions agricultural products significantly, coffee, mentions oil, but it also says it's got a strong manufacturing sector. So it's saying A for paper or paper products, but also higher value added things like aerospace. It's the 23rd largest exporter in the world. However, it's saying that it does have some problems because of that oil dependency, that it's affecting its currency. So that might indicate that it's not a stable economy. Brazil is the world's 5th largest country by population and area. It has grown rapidly. 4th largest car market in the world. So again, talking about number of citizens in terms of a market for goods and services. Its HDI has increased by 30%, so it is developing. It's well known for its inequality, so a significant problem there. Many of the large cities contain slum districts, so poor people living alongside rich people. And its healthcare system, again, significant problem, 125th out of 190 countries worldwide. But then it talks about how significant foreign direct investment is, and that would be linked into the free market, FDI creating jobs, and also that those businesses are investing in their workforce, so it increases human capital in the private sector. It also talks about multipliers from investment, higher tax revenues for the Brazil government, which would allow them to spend more on health and education themselves. But then also it mentions environmental negatives, so there's significant externalities caused there. And it also talks about leakages of the profits from the FDI. We've got some selected data comparing the UK to Brazil, so we can see roughly the economy of Brazil is about the same as the UK but slightly larger. However, per capita it's only $12,000 per person, but on the World Bank measure, that would be a developed country. It's growing at a faster rate than the UK. Its Human Development Index, though, is not still at 0.8, so it's not a developing country. It's ranked 85th in the world. Its unemployment is lower than the UK's, inflation significantly higher. Public sector debt is almost at that 60% level, so that may be of a concern. But they do have a current budget surplus. They are more focused on manufacturing than the UK, but the Gini coefficient is significantly worse. So 0 is good, 1 is very unequal. So that's a more unequal country than the UK. Year of schooling, 2 years less than the UK, and that means that the literacy rate is 10% less. So 10% of adults can't read or write. Life expectancy is 7 years less than the UK, which is developed. You've got a higher infant mortality rate, significantly larger population, and a significantly amount of the population which is dependent. So a quarter of the population is under 15, but that does mean in the future there'll be a significant increase in the size of the workforce. And then the last extract looks at some of the very current problems of Brazil. So here it has mentioned that people are protesting about corruption, poor health, poor adequate schools, and the transport and infrastructure. So all things that the government directly has control of are poor. But also it mentions that they have spent close to 30 billion on the Olympics and the World Cup, which may be better spent on those other areas. And then lastly, it's talking about most recently, so February 2014 is the most recent headline, saying that the currency has weakened very sharply. So again, this might show volatility in Brazil, and that's in response to a widening budget deficit. So even though the previous figures showed a budget surplus, that's saying that the government has spent more than it's earned, potentially to do with the World Cup, which it's mentioned there as well. And also the interest rates have gone up significantly, 10.75%. So coming back to the question, discuss the extent to which economic development can be promoted by reliance on free market policies. Well, the free market policies we have are things like privatisation, the ones the World Bank goes for, deregulation, or free trade. So what we want to do is, using a graph, if you wanted to, you could look at increases in FDI from privatisation, deregulation, or free trade. If you wanted to do it from a micro point of view, you could remove a tariff, which would reduce the price of goods and services. What you want to try and bring this back to, through a number of analysis steps, is something which solves some of those problems that you've got previously. So you've got healthcare as a problem, you have education as a problem. One way you could link that through FDI would be the increase in tax revenues for the government. So if there were greater tax revenues from FDI, from free trade, then that would allow you to invest in health and education, and that would help to improve the HDI of Brazil. You could argue for a more interventionist, and that would potentially be through protectionism. If you wanted to increase domestic industry, so you through either export promotion or import substitution. Again, you could do the opposite graph, a graph for a tariff, to explain how that would boost domestic production. Again, boosting domestic incomes because of that, or that it's likely that more of the profits would stay in the country, and then that could lead to more investment as well. Again, you want to link that back to some kind of improvement in health or education, or any of those other indicators of development like GNI. You could also choose something like infrastructure spending as a different one, and you might even talk about how that would increase the national debt to be able to do that. So even though they are in a deficit, you might talk about that as a policy to improve health and education. Depending on what you've gone for, so whether you have gone for government intervention or whether you go for free market, you're going to have a slightly different conclusion. If you've gone for the free market, you might want to try and solve some of the negatives. So if you've gone for the free market approach, and you might talk about negative externalities, you could talk about how you're going to remove the negative externalities. You could also talk about the inequality and how you would reduce that, so that potentially what you need is some kind of progressive tax and spending policies. So as the economy grows, the benefits are shared out. For the negative externalities, you may include some regulation to solve that one. If you are going to go for the government intervention policies, what you might have to try and do is somehow solve the potential problem of rising government debt and the fact that that might reduce the credit rating of the country, which might lead to higher interest payments. One way you could do that is to say that it might lead to higher economic growth, and that growth would reduce the debt as a percentage of GDP. So if you are successful with boosting the economy, although that might be a more longer term impact, the other way you could justify it is to say how it would benefit the private sector, so that it would actually encourage more FDI through crowding in. So you would give confidence to the private sector that there's going to be a more healthy and more educated workforce in the future, so they will invest in your economy to take advantage of those highly skilled workers.